Hello and welcome to the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast for July 2nd, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about. It is episode 222, and I have with me frequent guest and collaborator on all things Gold, Ghosts, and Guns, Dexter White. Dexter, how are you?
Good, Tom. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I had a lovely chat last night with Joe Matzley, the writer from Stargate SG-1 and Dark Matter and a couple of other shows, and about Babylon, about two things very near and dear to my heart: Babylon 5 and Star Wars. And it was a lovely space, and it's available on Joe's feed this morning if you want to listen to it, if you care about me geeking out about all things science fiction. But it was interesting. It's interesting that it came up because you texted me over the weekend to tell me about you having watched Star Wars: The Acolyte, which was a show that I couldn't stand, or at least I just gave up on after 3 episodes. It was the only actual Star Wars project that's come out that I've actually not finished. And you had a surprising take on it, and dovetailed nicely with some of the stuff you talked about in your article for this month's Gold, Ghosts, and Guns newsletter. And this is part of this is the inciting incident in story terms for this podcast. So why don't you just take it from there and tell me what you were thinking about that.
Yeah, I had fallen into the influence of this screaming, whining masses of Reddit, I guess, or wherever. I mean, it really wasn't for me anything specific. I just kind of took the crowd's word for it that The Acolyte was unwatchable garbage. And I watched the first episode, and it was, at the time it came out, and it didn't really grab me. And I usually don't just, I don't know, whatever. I just, the first episode timing and just some of the choices they made, I was like, okay, forget it. And then the screaming started with episode 2 and onward, and I just dropped it, and I never looked back. And then for no particular reason other than, boredom, I guess, over the weekend, I was like, screw it. I'll watch it, see what happens. What's the worst it could be? I rewatched from the beginning of the first episode. And I was like, well, it's not terrible. I was like, I wish they hadn't killed Carrie Ann Moss off in the first episode, because at the time, like, you don't know it's a flashback, or sorry kids, spoiler alert, but nobody watched it or will watch it, so I guess we don't have to worry about that too much. But she's in more than one episode, and she dies in the first. Sorry. But I muscled through that, and then I watched the second episode, which was the source of much histrionics, and the reason I had never watched the rest of it. And I watched the whole thing, and it was, I won't say it's the greatest piece of sci-fi or Star Wars I've ever seen, but the relevant takeaway for me was like, wow, I could think of a lot of things to criticize in it, but almost none of what was the popular uprising was the reason why I thought it was weak. And in fact, there were many things in it that were just completely opposite the so-called, public, decision of what its, net worth was. And I just kind of pondered that as I finished it, and so for me, I don't know, to refresh the audience, there was the most memorable phrase with the public criticism was lesbian space witches. Mm-hmm. Now, the phrase lesbian space witches is kind of fun to say, and we can both admit that it has a certain natural mimetic value. Right. And it took off, and I think everyone who heard it just repeated it 6 or 7 times. And this was what was wrong with, Lucasfilm under Kathleen Kennedy. I pondered a different aspect to this, which is just that it was another example, something we see frequently in our politics. It was another example of people just externalizing and projecting their kind of base anger about a thing onto the latest version of a thing without really interacting with it whatsoever. And that, I think, is becoming alarmingly constant in our society, to the point where I really think it's a big part of why we can't talk to each other anymore. We're not just not listening. We're simply not actually reacting to the matter at hand. We're just kind of waiting for the other person to stop talking, if we even do that, before we just belch out just the static analysis.
Yeah, no, I agree, and this is one of those things that I started seeing this with in relation to Star Wars, back in 2017, or the initial backlash against the Last Jedi, um, and it wasn't the criticisms of the things in the Last Jedi my were that were interesting to me. I mean, that's fine. If you don't like the movie, you don't like the movie. I'm still a kid who believes that all Star Wars post Return of the Jedi is a gift, right? At heart. Some gifts suck and some gifts are great, just the way it is. Um, but what I noted in because I interface a lot more with the regular geek culture than you do on a regular basis. It's what I do on YouTube to kind of relax and unwind from what we do for a living, right? And all this politics and markets and all this other rotten nonsense. And I just want to be able to like zone out and watch some great stuff about some stuff on YouTube about shit that I care about. And I couldn't do that anymore. It was so obviously clear that the hate towards Star Wars and other fandoms and other genre and other things, it was clear that it was being purposefully amplified, and that there was a kind of there was this polarization that was being created, and they were anxiety pimping, to use your phrase, Dexter, all of us, and gaslighting us into, you either love the old trilogy, or you're a good Star Wars fan, or a bad Star Wars fan. You're this, you're that, and the whole thing was designed to just destroy anything that people love. Right. That's what I saw. And
I just want
you to. I think that just reached the crescendo with the Acolyte.
So I have a question. So with Force Awakens, which is the first of the sequel trilogy, there was a combination of perhaps honest criticism, whatever. At least like people had issues with Rey. Sure. They had issues with maybe her having too much power for what they saw her go through. So they went through the Mary Sue criticism. There was what I considered at the time, and still consider to be, the entirely fake issues around Finn because he's black. And I was just like, you guys are just, somebody is trying to just stir up trouble based on something that no one gave a shit about. Like, there's been black characters in Star Wars from the beginning. Like, yes. It's just dumb, and I felt like it was contrived. But the race stuff was, well, whether we agree or not on it, it doesn't matter. Like, people meant what they said about it, sure. That's that. But what are you talking about relation to Last Jedi, which was the middle film? Are you not talking about that sort of Mary Sue issue? You're talking about something else more specific?
I'm talking about how it divided the fan base, and there were people who loved it, and there were people that hated it, and you and I are on opposite sides.
But elementally, though, what is
it was the level of amplification of the opposite side of the hate. Because after Force Awakens, while there was undercurrents that people weren't happy with things, right? And I even saw some of this with Rogue One. I remember Jack Posobiec, when Rogue One came out, tried to gin up controversy that it was a multi-culty cast and it wasn't very good. And I could tell that guy was running an operation then. That's when my spidey sense went off about him not being what I think,
anyone criticizing Rogue One is an idiot who doesn't understand story, because that thing was basically the best Star Wars film of all 10. If we're going to be honest,
it's very, very close to that,
which is different than saying it's your favorite. But if right. The more you know about story and filmmaking, it's pretty hard to just deny that this one is cut the best and is the best. But sorry, folks.
I agree. Elementally, I agree with you. Star Wars is still my favorite because I'm still a 10-year-old boy at heart.
Mine too, but I'm just saying from a filmmaker standpoint.
Of course, I agree with you. And so the division in the fan base over The Last Jedi, it's not that the criticisms of the movie aren't valid. You and I have gone back and forth for 8 years now about that movie, and we are on opposite sides of the fence and are
I don't know that we're on opposite sides of the fence, because I highly doubt that my criticisms of Episode 8 are what you're talking about. Well, my criticism is really simple. I just thought the editing sucked.
Yeah, fair. But what I'm getting at here is that those criticisms then became a whole thing about Kathleen Kennedy is destroying the franchise, and it's Jake Skywalker, and it's all
Right,
and
but
I
what I'm
just
asking,
watched
which criticisms are you talking about for episode 8 versus 7?
it was the handling of Luke in particular, and then how that was all amplified into, see, they don't love the original canon at all. They don't love the original characters.
Okay.
They are trying to tear it down, and they're trying to do. And so the voices that were there to amplify those criticisms were everywhere. And I know that there was just an insane amount of fake influencers on YouTube who had inside knowledge about what was going on. It was everywhere, dude. It was insane. And YouTube was throwing them at me every day. And I kept saying, not interested in that guy's channel, not interested in that guy's channel. Go away for 3 days and then come right back again.
And there was some recycling of the whole Ray and Finn criticisms from from episode 7.
Sure, there were.
Yeah. But I also think that what year was that? 2017 when
that was December 2017 is when that came out. So 2018. Okay.
And that this is also just literally, we all have forget that YouTube didn't always work the way it works today. But like, this was also sort of the apex of the ramp, so to speak, of the algorithm influencer culture. Like, this is when everyone had gone out and bought a cam and a ring light, and it was a little more of like the gold rush period. So there was definitely a reason why every third nerd was copying the same exact rant, because it was getting you followers.
And it was getting you money.
Yeah. Exactly.
And this is really what this podcast is about, is that we created this entire influencer set that now they have a business model, and they have to keep that business model running, right? And so we don't really need to go any farther about Star Wars. It's just emblematic of one aspect of this. We saw it there, and I've seen it, and we've seen it now in a lot of other areas. And so we also see it in our politics. At least that's what you were talking about.
The truth of Andor is that the criticisms of Andor were that it was totally outside of the canon, that it had totally ridiculous characters, that it was terrible, that blah, blah, blah. It was all woke. It was all about lesbianism. And it's like, none of that was true.
You meant the Acolyte. You just said Andor.
Sorry.
So let's
Correct.
Let's not besmirch the greatness.
Yeah, no, Andor was good. Sorry. The criticism of the Acolyte at the time was all of that. And I'll put it this way, the anti-woke voices glommed onto it simply as the springboard for anti-woke rant number 626, and there's a lesser known, the fact that the witches were even in it, I think, was part of the reason why this, like, Pasabik doesn't understand a lot of what was in Rogue One, given his comments, and a lot of these people criticizing the Acolyte didn't understand that the witches weren't just a thing made up for the purpose of this episode or these series, right? Like, they don't understand that it's in canon, so to speak. And because they didn't, it was very jarring for them, and then they freaked out. And yet it turns out that this series is actually very respectful of canon. Now, we're not going to do that in this episode, but you and I went through it all, and we agreed, there's a lot of real missed opportunities because of how respectful it, like, there's actually a really cool story in there that did not come out. And that's really what's unfortunately wrong with the Acolyte, is it's written in a very unenlightened style, meaning the writer it's just not that good. The writing's not good. And then if the writing's not good, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. And the editing is okay on an episode by episode basis, but it has an overall timeline fundamental problem with the way the 8-episode arc runs. Anyway, all of that though is just to say that the thing is different than the criticism, and it turned into a witch hunt, to use the pun, because the people who were there ready to pounce were just looking for their springboard. And I don't know how much of it was per se YouTube related and I will say that my thoughts of how prevalent this is certainly goes way beyond YouTube, especially when we're going to talk about politics. But um, this is a real issue, and I think just like maybe the first run of it was the ham-fisted criticisms of Finn being black in episode 7 in The Force Awakens, because that was obvious nonsense in the sense that nobody who was saying that was legitimately even watching the damn movie.
No,
It
absolutely.
was like they saw their moment to be an agent provocateur.
Yes. I can tell you when I'll give you a perfect example, since we have a perfect antipode to the Acolyte, which is Andor, right? And how Andor is now universally praised. But when Andor first came out, I was there on YouTube, and I can tell you that all of the YouTube influencers were all on the same page with the same lame criticisms about it slow and the editing and the this and the that, and literally verbatim. It was like they were all part of the mainstream media talking
Right.
about how our democracy, that this is such a threat to our democracy. You've seen those videos, those memes of like every local television station anchor
Right.
saying the exact same words. Well, I got news for you. John Campea and Grace Randolph and this one and that one, all were doing that over Andor. And I'm like, oh, fuck a whole lot of you folks right here, right now. And that's when I knew. That's when I had to really confirm for me that this was being driven by something else, and it
Yeah,
wasn't just
I'll
it.
postulate that this spaghetti throwing exercise that happens at the first episode of every one of these things is probably a permanent feature, in the sense that they're always going to try it because they don't care what the content is at all. They just know that it's kind of like, oh, well, we can trigger the water cooler and see what happens, and then if our criticism takes and basically trolls everybody well and it sticks, then we're off to the races.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think it's fundamentally, for any of the pieces we could talk about or have talked about, or any pieces coming in the future, important really what that thing is. I think
Right.
it's just, look, hey, we have another thing to throw spaghetti at.
Right. And so let's now shift that into the politics, and let's shift that into what you wrote about in this month's newsletter, where you were talking about the same kind of thing happening in terms of Trump's policies and and handling of the Iran Israel dust up. I hate to even call it a war at this point because it only lasted 12 days. All of that stuff, and go through, because it was really clear in the article that you wrote that you have these same criticisms of now Tucker Carlson and others, and I have the
Yeah.
same criticism. I'm getting that same criticism. I have that share that same criticism for other people in the alternative media space who are on the pro-Russian side or the pro-Iranian side.
I
So
lumped together Mark Levin, Tucker Carlson, Dave Smith, and MTG, or Marjorie Taylor Greene,
mhm.
because all of them simply, they all just sold their, spoke their book, sold their book. What's the cliche everyone always says
um,
about gold
yeah,
sellers?
they talk their book.
Talk their book.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like it's worth explaining in advance that especially for people who are like challenged in sarcasm and irony, that when I
Mhm.
go on a podcast and I make fun of people for saying they're good people because they don't believe in kicking puppies, that if you can't understand that dripping sarcasm and irony are part of the program here, like I mean, I'm just going to tell you, find something else to listen to. Um, so one of the aspects of libertarianism that I've had a problem with for a long time is that libertarians hold themselves up as saintly. Not all, not so much the left libertarians, but there's this tranche of libertarianism that I think besmirches the morally correct position that war is on balance immoral. That's something I believe. No irony. But when somebody makes the center of their personality this statement that, well, I'm just anti-war, man, there's nothing easier to be against. There's nothing less, you have no less skin in the game. That's like, and again, that's like being against kicking puppies. Which is why sometimes you have to tell libertarians who are sanctimonious that you love to kick puppies just to see what they say, um, and agree and amplify, and then say,
Right.
no, I actually have a puppy kicking team, and but to be more direct, when you're talking with an anti-war libertarian, take the side that war is the solution to the problem and see how much their brain can actually produce a refutation of the statement rather than just literally sinking immediately into personal insult. But more to the point, unfocused comments, like just it's all nonsense. And this is unfortunately for Dave Smith and increasingly Tucker Carlson, the real root of their worldview. I think Dave Smith applies it more. Uh, Honestly, is not the right word, but he's
Rigorously.
rigorously is better. I mean, Tucker, though, in this recent history was just it almost seemed just fully irrational. And then on the other side of it, I mean, do I really have to explain the mirror reflection of what Mark Levin believes and how he acted when this happened? I mean, I guess for the benefit of the talk, here's a little secret. Mark Levin is pro destruction of Iran, however it happens, whoever, and because he believes the destruction of Iran is to the benefit of Israel. I don't think we need any more details than that.
Nope.
I think people are probably familiar with that. And for people who like to avoid Mark Levin, which I understand, he was predictably in that modality during the recent 12-day war. Mm-hmm. Surprise, surprise. But my point is, in the article more broadly, was just because war is not usually a good idea, and just because the situation sure as hell seemed like we were getting dragged into it by Israel, not even against our will, but sort of by pure surprise, in the sense, and there's some things I'll get to in a second about why I believe that, and people are free to believe something else. Because ultimately this comes down to a situation where the facts we are presented with, none of us can really have much confidence in them. Like, one, it's a war. They're lying to us, certainly about tactics. Like, you don't say, hey, we're going to fly the planes up the middle of the Persian Gulf at 6:24 p.m. Like, you don't say that, because if you're not lying, they could shoot your planes down. So, and there's a reason why Israel's telling people, hey, you can't upload videos of the missiles hitting the neighborhood. It's because they're time stamped. And most people don't wait an hour before they take pictures of events. They boom, there's an explosion, and 45 seconds later they're filming, and then they upload a time-stamped video. This is very helpful if you're shooting ballistic missiles into a neighborhood, and then someone, puts a geotag time steer, like, oh, we basically almost hit what we were aiming for. Okay, move it 2 clicks to the left.
Right.
So obviously the facts, the specific tactical facts, will be false more than they're true. Mm-hmm. But we don't have to act like we can't deduce some things and use reasoning, use reason to try to figure out what's going on. And we also don't have to reduce everything to like reducto ad libertarium, where we just say, oh, war is wrong, and if this happens, it's World War III, and there's no other possible outcome. You're just like, Jesus fucking, I mean, really? And that's what we get. And then, God forbid, you want to have a just a little more nuanced view of the entire situation. Then you're either a warmonger or, an anti-war libertarian. You can't be someone who's like, hey, dude, this isn't just this AB dyad that you people have been stuck in for 30 years.
Right. Yes. And this is the lesson I've been trying to teach about. And I've been trying to use Star Wars to teach this lesson for a long time now. And, I've got news for you. It's not sticking. It's getting worse. And the reality is that we're being gaslit on both sides into believing things that are not true. And the goal here is not to absolve Israel or Iran or anybody else of their perfidy, their crimes, their this, anything else. It's to, you know, discuss what actually happened to the best of our ability and why it happened and what it all means. And that's where we need to be, as opposed to screaming at each other about our fifis. Like, it's not our job as analysts, and certainly this is something I've been screaming about online on Twitter at all sides of the community for months. Going, look, you're supposed to be an expert. You're supposed to know better. Tucker Carlson. I'll call them out. Daniel McAdams, Doug McGregor, all these people. I listen to them. I'm like, you're supposed to be an expert. You're supposed to be able to step back and assess the data and the information and give us that information and then let us figure out what's going on from there, as opposed to, taking a side.
Yeah, well, the medium is the trap. The medium is the trap, right? This is an autonomic thing. And when I wrote in the beginning of the article, I might just read from it because it's so I say it's called Grace Under Pressure. I'm talking about states of mind, and a state of mind separate from our stress hormones. It's called Grace Under Pressure. It's not just a Rush album, Tom. Situational awareness, what have you. It eludes most of us. To be sanguine amidst crisis is a heavy lift because the usual state is something else. The narrowing of awareness, hyper-focus on what the limbic system has deemed threatening, a retreat to the most efficient circuit, also known as our biases. Whether this is an insult or not depends on our actual values and education. Regardless, when the adrenaline dumps, there is no contemplation. We can pretend we are rational beings, but under stress, instinct rules. Martial artists learn patterns. Combat veterans rely on gross motor skills because under extreme duress, precision and improvisation both go out the window. That is what governs the commentary in the article, my talking about Acolyte, and honestly, the way I increasingly view the entirety of our political discourse. It's that there's no hope of philosophy because all there is autonomic response. And that is a function of the fact that we are not fully informed. We cannot take the facts and manipulate them into a display of causality of our own, that our own mind can and then argue about it with other people who have different interpretations of that. We're given summaries. The summaries are often false. And then we're encouraged to make hyper quick analysis, and everything becomes a step function in that you're on team 0 and you're in team 1, and there's no middle. It's all just burned away. And we can't keep doing this, or we're just living in a cartoon. It's not worth doing. I know Tucker Carlson is selling a lot of Alp, his new nicotine pouch. And I know he doesn't have a Fox check. And I know Dave Smith is probably making more money than he's ever made before after being the whipping boy. Not so much the whipping boy who lost, but just, the whole Douglas Murray event has made him much more of a household name than he was before, for sure. Just because some arrogant Brit was arrogant to him, which I guess is a great way to get rich. And Mark Levin just screams like a lunatic. And that's his book, man. But we're not learning anything. And I mean, what are we going to vote for? What is the left going to be willing to vote for at the end of this process? I mean, New York City might be a screaming warning of how, I don't think most people in New York City are communists. But I think that when people are sick of the system, they'll vote for the thing they think that will most damage the system. I think that very much explains 2016 with Trump.
I agree.
And 2020, we're going to have to suspend judgment. I have a feeling we're going to be learning more about things that we've been told are conspiracy theories about that election going forward. And then 2024, frankly, it was equally about Trump and also about the insult of living under a obviously senile president and being told you can't say that which you view to be plainly true.
Right.
Because I knew people who hated Trump who voted for him this time just because they could not handle being told that Biden wasn't senile. Now,
Right.
there are not a lot of people, and there are more people who were Republicans who were sort of never Trumpers, but not in like a Bill Kristol type. They just were like, embarrassed by Trump. So they couldn't,
Right.
they voted Libertarian. But this time they voted Trump because they wanted the Democrats to lose, viscerally so.
Right. Well, it's like, and that was, and now you can understand why why it was pushed to deny the concept of men versus women, and the whole trans movement was in many ways is about that same thing. The way it was politicized, which is to deny people their ability to state that is true. Dude, that's a dude over there, dude, and like and we're not allowed to talk about that, and then finally people are like, no, we're going to talk about it. And the question I have for everybody, and I know you do too, which is, where do we wind up if we're going to just if we're going to allow ourselves to be in that false dyad, in this case of Israel bad, Iran good? And I mean this sincerely. Like, can't they both be bad?
Right.
Can't they both be great? Can't they both be? You can have sympathy.
Can't
for
they
one
both
versus
be
the other.
honestly working within a rational framework that benefits themselves?
Right.
Even if it doesn't benefit us, like, and does that always have to be considered bad? Now, terrorism is bad. Blowing up square blocks of cities while pretending you're doing surgical strikes is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also not events that are isolated on a timeline. Now, I don't want to justify either, but
Mm-mm.
I will tell you I come down more on I'm sympathetic to what Israel needed to do post October 7th at a strategic level, and I'm
Mm.
not sympathetic on how they achieved it tactically. But I understand why they said, okay, we are not going to tolerate the existence of Hamas or Hezbollah anymore, and ultimately we're not going to tolerate the people who pull their leashes being alive if we can kill them. I get that. I think that's a rational framework. It's not what I would have, if I were in charge of the US government, encourage them to pursue, but that doesn't mean I don't understand it. And being told I have to pretend to not understand it in order to, be a righteous member of team 1 versus team 2, like, not interested. Sorry, right. That's not who I am. It never was. And if you thought it was, you don't know me. And that's fine. The internet's a big place. There's other shit to read.
Right. Well, I
promise you're not going to run out of words out there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And this is what has, it's begun to govern my thinking much more than it used to as well. And, as I watched this play itself out, and, it was funny, I was doing some stuff this morning for our patrons, and I, just to clear the air with people, I said, I'm actually part of the reason why I'm less sympathetic to Iran than I would have been, 6, 8, 9 months, even a year, 2 years ago, is simply because at the end of the day, when push came to shove and they were punched in the mouth, they folded. And they told us for years that they were going to, give us this grand retribution for the evil that is Israel. And then they turned out to be, frankly, a paper tiger. And I'm like, for me, looking at the grand chessboard and wanting to see a path to how can we get to global peace and disempower the people who created this freaking false conflict, or not false conflict, but this conflict built along false parameters. I'm genuinely angry about that, because I know how unbelievably destabilizing that is in the long term for all of humanity. And I'm like, dude, you were supposed to, stand up to these people, and then you folded like a cheap suit. And okay, well, there it is. Like, what am I supposed to do?
So my job in this Gold Goats and Guns enterprise is to interrupt you here and point out that that's the wrong time to do a moral analysis. We're trying, there being because Iran lost, like, this isn't the kind of analysis. We're
Oh,
not doing advocacy.
no, no,
You
no.
know,
Don't get me wrong. Let me do a better
well,
job
no. Let me just
explaining that. Okay,
one
go ahead.
second.
Sure.
The reality is that, and this I think confuses people with our thing sometimes. Is we do like a real politic, actual view of the world projection thing, and most of what that's going to be going forward is going to recognize that Iran lost. The
Right.
IRGC lost. The proxies are neutralized. That changes the situation, and it is not a moral judgment whatsoever. Now,
Right.
you and I may have different, we may have the same. What it does not come into it. We refuse to live in a state of denial about what just happened, which seems to be increasingly desired by people. And nothing is better than people who willfully believe propaganda that says, Iran took out the entire Israeli Air Force. It's like, buddy, did not happen.
Right.
So we got to live in reality, and there's no reason to put a moral judgment on it. And I would just point out, like what you were saying is, look, Israel's not the only thing that needs a punch in the mouth in the world, and in fact, Iran needed a big punch in the mouth too, because upon creation, the first thing they did was go put their business where it didn't belong. In pursuit of something that Israel and Iran were pretty close in the 70s, and even frankly most of the first part of what the mullahs were doing, Israel wasn't happy about it. But listen, Israel and Iran were working together in Iran-Contra, so people don't know what they don't know.
Right. Well, again, you're correct that was my position during all of this, and what I was actually doing was jumping to the end to say, if you want to feel comfortable with my limbic reaction and my grander view of the game board, this is part of the reason. This is part of my frustration and why I'm like, no, I really did want. I said from the beginning, I'm like my optimal outcome for this is a tie and a lot of injuries, meaning I want them both to be, like, to get your shots in, boys, get it over and done with, and then let's see where we are. And okay, good, you're done now. Great. One can't, and great. Who loses in that? And the old agitators, the old Asian provocateurs that have been that thrive on chaos are the ones that lose in that situation. So at the end of the day, I'm cautiously optimistic that strategically that we're moving in the right direction, and I don't have to take a side here. And that's that. Period. And I'm good with that outcome. And that apparently is beyond the pale in 2025.
I think a lot of people, are younger than we are in a lot of this space, and there's sort of a cartoon version of Israel in their head mixed with the one thing I'm going to push back on people is like the idea that this is all in service of greater Israel, and Israel's going to take over basically half of Iraq and a little of Lebanon. And there's a bunch of maps you could go find, but they're not necessarily contiguous with existing borders. But imagine in Israel, 6 or 8 times the size that it is now, and that's the secret agenda. Okay, don't buy it. I'm more interested about what just happened in this, drastic weakening of Iran and the IRGC specifically, in imagining what the world looks like. And this is not to forgive anything that Israel has done. And this is the thing I have to repeat over and over because people don't seem to get this, is I'm just predicting where I think this goes because of the magnitude of the shift in power. Right. And I think Israel just won, period. That's what I think. I could be wrong. And believe me, when they restart the hostilities a week from Thursday and I look like an idiot, I expect that that's a possibility. But at the same time, my ultimate call here is that Trump has initiated a change, which has also, perhaps in concert with Bibi, or simply that Bibi read the room, which is kind of where I come down on it. But again, we don't know. Everyone who's like, well, I know what Bibi and Trump were talking about. No, you don't. It's like, I want to know too. And if you have tape, let me hear it. It's probably AI, but we don't know. We can only look at what's happened. And I think that what's happened here is that Israel's going to have a far less reason and also far less excuse and far less patience held by others for pulling any more shit once this serious nidus against its existence is removed. Israel's going to have no choice but to be a better member of the neighborhood going forward. And so too will that be a condition of any negotiated recognition of Saudi or whatever the Abraham Accords, future elements that clearly are coming and are clearly being worked up. There's going to be a negotiation here. And that's a different world than the world we've lived in. And that's a world I see coming into being. And that's not in any way an endorsement of how we got here. I'm just, the RGC has been for a very long time been held up to be something it's not. People don't understand the IRGC is more than anything a theocratic terrorist organization that's well-funded, masquerading as a military. And the reason is that the conventional, think of this like Turkey in many ways. Like the Turkish Islamic state that imagined by Erdogan has had to do a lot of work to get its army in line because its army is very secular, comparatively speaking. When the revolution happened in Iran, something similar happened, and the IRGC kind of rolled up all these street gangs who were on the side of the true theocrats and created this organization where they, it's the brown shirts, it's the enforcers, but very religious, and they empowered them, and the people do not like them. And now a lot of them are dead, and all of their proxies are dead. And the Iranian military, the so-called whatever, the guys who run the blue water navy as opposed to the brown water navy that's run by the IRGC, listen, we have a setup inside the country for the people of Iran to tell us what they want. And the IRGC being weakened considerably is going to be a part of that. The IRGC was never a legitimate warfare operation. They did not observe the rules of war. They attacked non-combatants. They attacked terrorists. They attacked countries that they theoretically weren't at war with, like the United States. They killed Marines in Beirut. They killed all of our servicemen in Iraq. They were giving all the Shiite militias EFPs, which are the penetrators. Now, I'm going to tell you, I understand a little bit more why Iran is sabotaging U.S. presence in Iraq because it's on their border. I'm not saying I support them killing U.S. troops in any way, but I think it's a more rational operation for them to be doing it. There's a military explanation for it. The force projection they imagined into primarily Sunni, areas like Lebanon, to say nothing the fact that Lebanon was majority Christian not that long ago. This stuff was never about Israel. It was about their own version of the Islam. It was about the Islamic Revolution as understood in Iran, and more broadly for, the expansion of Islam, but obviously for them, the expansion of Shia Islam. And that ain't our fight.
No, not our fight. Not our fight at all. And that's a workable outcome for me. And I'm okay with that. And, one of the things that was eye-opening for me was on the night of the initial attack on Iran, that we found out that the Israelis had an entire drone factory under the IRGC's nose, there the entire time, that they pulled off combined arms operations. None of that happens without help on the ground in Iran by Iranians.
Oh, no. Israel has proven that they are capable of intelligence operations that, frankly, only exist in movies for the CIA. Like the CIA can only pull off those operations inside Hollywood and LA County.
Right. But I'm okay with believing even either version of that story, but it's something to at least consider and to discuss, right? And have a rational discussion about, as opposed to, oh no, you're just, making excuses for Israel, or you just sound, like a shill for these people. I'm like, no, they've like, these are the facts. And if you want to ignore those facts, that's your prerogative. Um, and the same, and on both sides. I mean, again, none of this is a way of absolving anybody of their crimes. Everybody's got crimes here. And what are we as outside observers? What should we be looking for? What should we want to see out of this? And if we can't be, and if we don't want to be active combatants in it, which we shouldn't be, then as observers, what do we want to see as the outcome? And how can we, ensure that this thing, once it's over and burns itself out, never comes back?
Yeah, and
What you said about this is what I've wanted from the beginning. I want the Iranian people to choose their government, and if they decide to choose to stay under the theocracy, well, that's their choice. But you don't get to have a nuclear weapon. That's my line in the sand, and that statement for me personally comes down to the desire to see civilian populations no longer being blackmailed by government organizations who steal people's money and wealth and power and then use it for their own personal purposes. That's a general statement, and that's where libertarians should be on all fronts. And what I'm seeing is a whole bunch of libertarians arguing for the proliferation of nuclear weapons so that civilians can be blackmailed. And I'm like, that don't seem like the non-aggression principle to me, motherfucker.
No, it's just they think the NAP means you can't interfere with another country's gaining of the nuclear weapon. And I personally am not, I'm not a libertarian, so I don't really care about these angels on the head of the pin of the NAP dancing. I just don't give a shit. But I also just, back in the era of mutual self-sabotage and the libertarian movement between the left libertarians and the Trotskyites and everyone else, this whole idea, there was always this thing where when you were in a room of libertarians where people were just doing argumentum ad absurdum, and they're like, of course it's okay if a person owns a nuclear weapon. Am I not a sovereign individual? It's like, shut the fuck up. Like, seriously, like it's not that the scope of that kind of argument is obviously false. It's that argument's type is obviously false. Like, sitting around for an hour engaging in logical fallacies is not a good use of your time. And the NAP is more useful about governing reaction than, because if you believe you're going to prevent action by everybody believing this thing, you're just fundamentally naive about how the world works. Mm-hmm. And that's just, there's no other way around it. And that's kind of where, this whole thing is. Politics has no time for you to go through your stages of grief, right? And not that I'm endorsing Kubler-Ross or any one of these types of social science like frameworks ever. Right. Another thing you should expect from me not to do. However, we're all familiar with the stages of grief concept. The first stage, and the only one I'm going to talk about, is denial. And that is what happens when you live your life only running on your limbic system, because you're going through a sense of cognitive dissonance, and something happens, like Israel pulls off a successful operation, and you can't handle it because your entire worldview is predicated on them not being able to take out Iran. Well, guess what, buddy? They just took out Iran. And then we went in and put the cherry on the cake, and you can believe that Iran was not damaged at all and it was all a stunt. We'll see. And someone's going to be right and someone's going to be wrong. Yes, I understand we're being lied to. I led with that. But when you look at all of it and you look at the balance of what you see, ask yourself, do you feel like Iran is winning? Like, is that the overall takeaway from all the pieces? And all the pieces are, worthy of doubting, each piece. But when you look at them all and you're making a judgment call here, and I said, I believe this, you're like, oh, Dexter's full of shit. Fine, I'm full of shit on that. And you might be full of shit on this. When we look at all the pieces on the desk, is the takeaway that Iran just kicked everybody's ass? Because if that's the takeaway, I'm going to tell you, you got to listen to something more than Telegram, because you're plugged in to an information warfare channel that's lying to you, and you're not getting any oxygen in the mix.
Yep. Agreed. No,
And that's something
agreed.
we all have to be fastidious about. That is not me judging you. That's me saying I consciously consume a lot more stuff than I want to from a much more varied sources than I want to, only not because I want to listen to friggin' Redditors talk, for God's sakes, but because the more channels you look at, the more you can understand how the information warfare itself works.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
The more bullshit you consume that's flavored differently, the more you realize it's all bullshit. And the more you realize, then you see the matrix. You see what both sets of actors are doing to their minions. This episode is all about telling you to stop being a minion.
Right.
And, not just you, the listener, or metaphorically, I'm not trying to insult people. I'm just saying that this is a serious problem in political movements in America. There's just way too many people who are not using their brains. They're using their instincts. And it is hard to be a philosopher in a bar fight. I get that. We have to try.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think that's a perfectly good way to wrap this up, honestly. I don't think there's very much more to be said about this. You have to remind yourself to just, I think the 48 hour, the 72-hour rule is a really good one. Look, when big things happen, take your time, take a deep breath, and don't react. I can tell you, as where in the space that I occupy right now, right, as meager as that amount of influence has, I can tell you that my phone was ringing off the hook for the first 3 or 4 days of this, and I'm like, nope, not doing a thing, not jumping on a live stream, not doing this, not doing that. And there have been many calls for that, and I'm like, over the years, and the longer we do this, the more I realize that there's a lot more value in taking your time and watching the way things play out. For example, just the last note, you and I were discussing what was happening in this in that 12-day conflict on day 2, and you made the observation, like, let's see what Iran does, but if they don't come back over the top with a massive barrage, then we have to wonder if this thing's not already on its way to being finished. And that was a very interesting, and that was an important observation. And it was like, and I said to myself, okay, even more reason why I'm going to invoke the 72-hour rule as opposed to the 48-hour rule. I'm going to keep watching this to see how this plays out.
Well, what that was based on, very simply, was a decapitation strike of a unified enemy doesn't do what a decapitation strike of a tyranny does. And what that said to me is that there was daylight between the IRGC and the regular military. Mm-hmm. And once IRGC command was wiped out and military command was wiped out, the regular military and listen, I don't know how many launchers were hit. I don't know how many bottlenecks the Israelis figured out, that if all the missiles are in the cave and they collapse the front of the cave and then wipe out the 3 launchers outside the cave. I don't know about the fixed versus truck mounted, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I don't have facts that I believe, right? I've seen as much bullshit AI and ARMA footage being played as ARMA's a video game that's often used. It's very realistic, or realistic enough, although it's, to me, very obvious. But there's a lot of fake stuff. It's just fake. And but strategically speaking, tactically speaking, the absence of a barrage told me, like, they either can't launch because of Israel just gamed it that well, or more likely, there's a command break because the command is not sitting over a unified enemy. Because listen, it's not like a mystery of who would have done that to them. If you have no comms and all you know as an Iranian field commander is that Israel did all this stuff, you probably should have a basic plan of, like, shoot missiles towards Israel. That's my move if I don't hear from command. Mm-hmm. And if you had a unified enemy, wouldn't that be their kind of normal baseline training response for this kind of day? The day that they've said they've literally told us for how many years that would be their plan should this day come. I don't think that was a secret to anyone inside the Iranian command, and they did not do it.
Right.
not to the degree that you would have. So they were either lying about their capabilities, which they should have been. The exaggeration is a valid form of deterrence.
Mm-hmm.
But and yes, the Israelis lied about how much damage they took, and yes, the Americans helped and lied about helping. All these things can be true, but ultimately, Tom, you're right. I said it at that moment because I was like, this response is not enough to be. They're not in the game. They're just not.
Right. And the thing, and to put a final point on that, all of these lies that you uncover, right, people, does not mean that the opposite is true. Just because Iran lied about how much damage they took or how much damage they did, or Israel lied about how much damage they took, and blah blah blah. Just because you uncover those lies does not automatically mean that the converse is true. That's the false, to quote Dexter again, if not A, then B bullshit that we have been led to the false intellectual paradigm that we've all been led into believing and reacting to. And that has to end if we want to have a return to rational discourse. Because to cap off this podcast, we started with Star Wars, right? We started with the Acolyte. What happened? We started with The Last Jedi. What happened? The backlash to The Last Jedi was so overwhelming that Solo underperformed. And Solo was a perfectly good movie, by the way. Dexter and I agree about this. By the way, by the time the Acolyte came out, no one watched Skeleton Crew. Came out a couple of months later. Great little show with a great message for kids and adults to watch together. Good show. Well written, well acted, well directed. Well, all of it. Good execution. So, just because X happened does not mean that all of Disney Star Wars sucks. Just because Y happened doesn't mean Israel bad, Iran good, or Iran good, Israel bad. None of that, or the converse. None of that means anything. Evidence of absence is not the absence of evidence, or the other way around. So,
yeah. All right, but it's time to put the skull bong down.
Absolutely. Let's. I guess we'll leave it there. So,
thank you. I think that's. This is going to be a continuing journey, not a stop at the train. It's we have to keep. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, I think, with our non-financial commentary, which interfaces with our financial commentary, is always just trying to point out that this story that seems simple is seldom simple, and you need to. I'm not saying don't rely on your habits, but tune what your habits are and be willing to defer filling in gray space, because the AI is getting better. The lies are going to keep coming, and the level of lying may continue to shock us all. I don't have. I'm not willing to predict that it's going to get better. I wish I could. I wish I could. I wish we. The alternative is maybe we all get a little smarter and we get a little harder to have our legs pulled. And maybe that demoralizes the people who want to lie to us at scale enough to give us an alternative. That's all I got for you. But that's what I'm advocating for.
Yep. And the more of us that do it, the harder it will be for them to gaslight us.
Yeah. We don't want to be in Wall-E.
Yeah, we don't want to be there. Not at all.
Can't be the end goal.
Yep. All right, man. Thank you so much for that, Dexter. As always, you guys find us. You can find him at Dexter K. White on X/Twitter or whatever, and you can find me at TFL1728. You can find us at Patreon/GoldGhosts and Guns and GoldGhostsandGuns.com. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.